Now let's talk about importing OBJ files into ZBrush from outside of the ZBrush program. Meaning someone has supplied you with an OBJ file from Maya or Modo, somewhere where a model has been generated, and then you need to import that mesh into ZBrush, subdivide it, organize the mesh, and then sculpt it into something else. So in this video, we're going to look at how to import OBJs from outside of ZBrush, how to organize the mesh using polygroups, and then how to sculpt and make effective use of your subdivision levels. Subdivision level sculpting is extremely powerful. It, alongside Dynamesh, are your two major ways of sculpting inside of ZBrush. And it's very important that you understand and can use both of them to leverage their strengths and weaknesses against each other. Because as you see in our other video in this series on ZRemesher, that it's very, very important to be able to take a Dynamesh and create a subdivision model from it, and to be able to go from a subdivision model to a Dynamesh. So it's my hopes that in this video you can get a good grasp on the process of sculpting on an imported mesh, working with your subdivision levels, organizing the mesh, and creating some interesting shapes. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to begin by going to the Tool menu, opening up the Tool palette, and I'm just going to select the Polymesh star, draw it in the canvas, and then go into Edit mode. Now, as we've said before in some of the other videos, the Polymesh star is kind of a null object. It's a base shape into which you can import other models. So I'm going to go to Import, and I'm going to load up the fbm.obj. Now this is just a generic full body male mesh that used to come from the Pixelogic website many years ago. And it's something that I keep around handy. It's just a nice generic male mesh. You can go to the Lightbox and you can actually find other meshes here. Like there's the Super Average Man by Zach Petrock. There's Nick Z's Human Male. There's the Demo Soldier that was by Ryan Kingsland. So there's other generic meshes, and you can find plenty of these online too. Or you can generate your own if you like poly modeling, or if you like modeling inside of ZBrush using the Z modeler tools. You can generate your own meshes. The important thing is to just understand how to import in a low-resolution cage and start working on it inside of ZBrush. Now, you don't necessarily have to start with the Polystar. That's just how I do it because it's good practice. It makes sure that you're not importing it into any other object with any transforms on there. So, for example, if I was on the simple brush and I just went ahead and imported, it would automatically just import that model in. So I will draw this on the canvas, go into Edit mode. I'm going to change my material and go into Frame mode. And here you can see it's just a nice, clean, orderly mesh. It has nice edge loops around the eyes and the mouth. It has nice geometry for the ears. All in all, it's a good-looking base that we could use to create any number of creature or characters. So the first thing that I want to talk about is organizing your meshes using polygroups. Polygroups you'll find here under the Tool menu. Polygroups are sort of color-coded ways to organize your mesh by face selection. So for example, if I were to select the faces of this hand, let's do both of them. We'll turn on X symmetry, and then let's isolate the hands. So here we've got the hands isolated from the rest of the body with visibility. If I go to Polygroups and then click Group Visible, those hands get tagged with a new color. If I Control-Shift-Click on the background, that reveals the rest of the body, and now you can see the body and the hands are two different colors. That's because the hands and the body are in two separate polygroups. So if I Control-Shift-Click on the hands, I can now very quickly isolate them. Now watch this. If I click Auto Groups, I can automatically group those two hands separately. So now I can isolate one hand, another hand, or the two hands together. So that's just by Control-Shift-Clicking on a polygroup. You can show or hide it. If you want to invert what's visible, Control-Shift-Click, Control-Shift-Click drag on the background. That's Control-Shift-Click and drag. And if you want to show everything, Control-Shift-Click on the background. So polygroups are really, really handy if you want to very quickly and easily show or hide different parts of the mesh. We can also use them later on in hard surface for cutting edge loops. We can also use them when we're creating UVs using UV Master. polygroups are really a handy way of just organizing your mesh and making it easier to work with as you're sculpting or undertaking any number of other tasks in ZBrush. So I'm going to zoom in on the head here because I want to show you some really handy things that we can do with them when it comes to the mouth. Now if I select the move brush, and let's say I want to open the mouth, you'll notice that my brush grabs both the upper and lower lip. So I might think, well, let me try masking. So I'll mask the upper lip, and then I'll try and move. But that's not working either because that mask didn't quite get everything. So it can be quite tricky to get the mouth open using the move brush. Now I can go to B for brush, M for move, and select move topological. The move topological is simply the move brush with auto masking, topological masking turned on, and then a range value set. So if I set my range to 0.5, now if I use my move brush, it grabs just those points of the upper lip. The reason it's doing that is the standard move brush will grab every point underneath that red circle on the outside. Move topological will grab the point that I'm clicking on, and then it grabs the points that are topologically close to it. So even though this point is close to this point spatially, if I had to walk to this point on the topology, I'd have to go all the way around this circle and come over here. So topologically, it's quite far away. So that's how the move topological brush works. The problem with it is it works fantastic, I find, for things like toes and tight spaces in costumes. But when I'm trying to sketch or gesturally create a character, I want to be able to isolate and move pieces a lot faster. And there's just a little bit of slowness to this brush while it's calculating that topological move. It just doesn't have the same immediacy as the move brush. That's something, if you try the two, I think you'll experience as well. So you'll see the difference once I show you my technique. So what I want to do is I want to polygroup the lower jaw separate from the rest of the body. It'll also make it easier to open and close the jaw. So to do that, I am going to go to the Tool menu, Morph Target, and Store a Morph Target. So what is a morph target, you might say? A morph target is a copy of your mesh in memory. So if I make some changes to the model now, come back to the morph target menu and click switch, I can switch back and forth between my stored version of the mesh and the changed version of the mesh. So that is a morph target. You can only have one morph target at a time. Unlike layers where you can store, multiple versions of a model, and that's slightly different. Morph targets are older than layers, and they're useful for other things. So I've stored a morph target. So watch what happens. I'm going to smooth the mouth so it opens. So now I can very easily take my visibility marquee, and I can very easily come in here and I can isolate just those faces of the lower jaw like this. Now I'm going to invert visibility, so just the lower jaw is visible. I'm going to go to Polygroups and click Group Visible. So now the lower jaw has its own polygroup. Now I want to get the shape of my mouth back because I've ruined the model. I'm going to go back to Morph Target, and remember that we stored a copy, so if I click Switch, it restores the shape, but it keeps that polygroup. So now I can Control-Shift-Click on the lower jaw. If I Control-Click on the background, I can mask it. And now I can very easily and quickly open the upper jaw, invert the mask. I can change the position of the lip, give him a big underbite. Let's undo that. I can go to Transpose Rotate, and I can rotate that lower jaw and open it much easier. If I feather the edge of that mask, it becomes even more effective. So being able to isolate that lower jaw is really important, I find. Now, the same is true for the ears. Let's say I want to sculpt some big pointy goblin ears here. If I grab my move brush and do that, invariably I'm going to end up grabbing the points behind the ears. So I'm going to isolate the ears, just like so. And I'm going to go to Polygroups and Group Visible. So I have now tagged the ears with their own polygroup. So I can hide them, mask them, and then invert the mask, do my sculpting, and it protects the ear or the head behind it. But I want to be able to have a little more control. I want to be able to isolate just those faces around the back of the ear so I can preserve this sort of draft back here, this undercut at the back of the ear that really makes the ear feel realistic from the back view, because you don't want the ear growing straight out of the head. The ear has an undercut and a really strong sense of form and sweep going back behind it. So to accomplish that, we're just going to go ahead and polygroup that ring that goes around the ear. So I'm just going to go ahead and isolate the ear. Now I'm going to hide that ring of faces that just runs around the ear. Just by Control, Shift, clicking and dragging, holding down the Alt key for my visibility marquee. So there we go. I have hidden everything but the ears. So watch this. If I just go ahead and polygroup the ears, group visible, the old polygroup still stays on the part that I hid. So now I can isolate the ears, invert the mask, and I can move the ears around. But that blue set of faces that represents the, that ring inside the back of the ear, that remains. So it just makes it a bit easier for us to work with that. A little bit easier to control the ears themselves. Much easier now to rotate those ears. There we go. Here we go. That'll be better. Let's rotate these ears again. There we are. So now we have organized our mesh using polygroups. So we can take advantage of these polygroups as we're sculpting to really make things much easier to work with. The ears, the jaw, the lips, the mouth, all of these parts will be much, much easier for us to isolate, mask, and individually affect with our brushes. So let's go ahead now and just take a look at how we can sculpt and use our subdivision levels, moving between them, adding divisions, stepping up and down, basically the mechanics of subdivision sculpting in ZBrush. So we're going to begin by just selecting the Move brush and working into the base shape of the model and starting to shape something interesting and compelling for our character. We're not even going to add a subdivision level to begin with. So let's just go ahead and start sculpting. Now, I'm probably going to want to isolate the head from the rest of the body. Let's say, for example, this character doesn't need to have a body because it's got a costume that's covering its torso, and I really only need to create the head and shoulders. Or let's say that I'm working on a concept and I'm really only concerned with creating the bust. What I want to show you how to do is how to delete parts of a mesh you've imported if you need to, because there will be instances where you'll want to delete parts of a mesh. Let's say, for example, you're trying to create a insert mesh brush of just a hand. You'll need to be able to delete the rest of the body in that case. So let's say that we want to isolate the head. I'm going to use my visibility marquee just to isolate the head and shoulders. Now I'm going to use Control, Shift, click and drag. That is my visibility marquee. And I'm going to press the Alt key, and that's going to turn it into a hide marquee. And I'm just going to hide those faces that I don't want. So here I've accidentally hidden these and I want them. So I'm going to Control, Shift, click and drag a marquee on the background. That will invert visibility. And I'm just going to hide those. Invert visibility again, and there we go. Now if I'm happy with that, I'm going to go to the Tool menu. Go to Tool, Geometry, Modify Topology, and there's an option under here called Delete Hidden. I will delete Hidden, and those faces are now gone. So the body is now no longer there. So if you need to delete part of a mesh, simply hide it, go to Tool, Geometry, Modify Topology, and click Delete Hidden. So let's start sculpting now. I'm going to use the Move brush with X symmetry turned on, and I'm not going to actually add a subdivision level like I said. I want to initially begin by just sculpting the base shape from what we already have. I'm going to spread the eyes out a bit. I'm going to mask the eyes, invert them. I'm going to spread them out. And there's this neat thing that I'd like to do is to rotate the eyes on the axis. So I'm going to go to the Rotate tool. And let's rotate them around the y-axis and pull them out. Now what that does is, let's go back to our clay tubes brush, what that does is it brings the placement of the eyes wider and out, so it's more like an animal. Actually, wide set eyes like this tend to be more like perhaps a herbivore. with the more binocular vision, they're going to be more predatory. I'm going to also rotate these around the z-axis, and I'm going to scale them up. There we go. And use the clay tubes brush just to continue working the surrounding anatomy. Again, not even adding a subdivision level yet. Not interested in adding any subdivision levels. I just want to be working with this base subdivision level. I'm going to select the ears here, mask them, and I'm going to scale them up. I'm going to turn off the gizmo, and I'm just going to use transpose to scale these ears up. Scale them up, then rotate them, and then move them back into position. Invert that mask, and then we'll just use the clay tubes brush to build up the head around it. I'm going to isolate the lower jaw. Actually, let's enlarge that mouth a bit. Take the move brush and just pull the corners of the mouth back. Mask the lower jaw. And let's adjust that barrel of the upper lip there, the maxilla of the skull. And then we'll bring the lower jaw down. Let's feather the edges of that so we get a softer kind of transition there. I'm going to give it a little bit of an underbite. There we go. I'm going to use my move brush just to adjust the shoulders here. And I'm going to do a transpose topology mask down the neck. That's just holding down the control key, clicking and dragging. Invert that mask, and I'm going to use transpose rotate to bring the neck down. Let's unmask the neck a bit more. There we go. Let's rotate the neck down, bring it forward, and then let's mask up to the base of the skull, and we'll bring the head up. And then just use the move brush to kind of hunch the shoulders a bit. I'm going to mask the back of the head so we don't end up affecting that. I just want to give it kind of a hunched sort of posture here. And that's nice. I'm going to build up the silhouette of the masseter muscles here. That's the jaw muscles. From the front view, the jaw tapers in too much for me, so I'm going to bring these out. Again, we still haven't added a subdivision level. I'm just doing everything from this base subdivision level. Try and make every shape you can from the lowest subdivision level that will support it. I find that that's just good practice. That helps you create better form because you're always thinking about the most basic form and volume first and foremost. Let's go ahead and enlarge these eyes again. We're going to go to B for brush, M for magnify, the A key for magnify because I just want to magnify those eyes a bit. Let's go ahead and put some spheres in there for the eyes while we're at it. We're going to go ahead and go to the Lightbox tool and open up a polysphere. Go back to our head, subtool, append, and we'll append this polysphere in. Select that sphere, and then we're just going to move it and scale it into position. I find it's easier to start identifying with the sculpture and the character early on if I've got some kind of sphere in there for the eye. It makes a huge difference, and once I start identifying with the character, I can start really making some informed decisions about the sculpture and about the design. But if I can't really identify with it, it's hard for me to do anything that I feel really comfortable with. So as soon as I can, I like to get some eyeballs in here. I'm pulling the medial canthus away from the surface of the eyeball there. That's the little tear duct. That's called the medial canthus. There we go. Sort of feels like a deep one from the H.P. Lovecraft story Shadow over Innsmouth. I'm going to select that sphere, go to Z plugin, under Subtool Master, here. I'm going to go to Mirror. I'm going to merge into one subtool across the X-axis and click OK, and that just merges those two spheres together into one subtool. Now if I turn on my X symmetry, go to the Standard brush, drag rectangle stroke and select, let's say, alpha 06. Turn up our Z intensity. We can put some corneal bulges here. And then I'll just use the repeat stroke function there to repeat the stroke on those corneal bulges. Repeat stroke is here under Stroke, Modifiers, Replay Last. I've set a custom hotkey of Alt-2 for that. What it does is it just allows me to create a stroke. So I'll draw that corneal bulge, and then I press Alt-2 and it replays that stroke, effectively strengthening the shape that I just made. We'll go back to the head, and now we're ready to add a subdivision level with Control-D. And I'm going to go back to my clay tubes brush and just continue working up the shapes here. Again, don't be too anxious to create too many subdivision levels too soon. Try and create those sort of anatomical base shapes as soon as possible with as little geometry as possible. And as you step up your subdivision level each time, it'll look more and more natural and realistic. I'd like to move those ears. I'm going to hide the head, mask it. There we go. Feather the mask. And let's take Move. I'll just use my Transpose Move brush, and I just kind of want to bring those ears up. Take the Move brush and just tinker with those shapes a bit. Invert the mask, and I want to build up the cranial mass behind it. And I'm not too worried about having this cranial mass hugging the ear here. I think that might be kind of neat looking, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Invert that, bring those ears out. That's a little happy accident right there. I kind of like that little webbing that I got from the ear to the jaw. I might let that stay for right now. Go to our clay tubes brush and just build up those masseter muscles again. The cheekbone. I want there to be real wide cheekbones on this guy. Bring the eyes up, and then switch to the eyeballs themselves and bring those up. And let's go ahead and save our work while we're at it. And I'll add another subdivision level at this point, and we can start using the clay tubes brush. Clay tubes brush tends to work better at higher subdivision levels, but I'll still use it at relatively low ones, just to create sort of big, broad forms and shapes. We'll go back to the regular standard brush with without the drag rectangle stroke to work up the nose here. And we'll build up the temple region here. And I'm going to use the smooth brush. I'm going to turn down the Z intensity and just use the smooth brush to knock back some of those shapes. Turning the Z intensity down makes it less destructive, so you can use it at a lower subdivision level without having to worry about it destroying any of the shapes that you've already made. I'm going to turn the alpha off on my clay tubes brush. That just makes it a little bit more organic, I find. taking the inflate brush around the eyes here. I just want to pucker up those eyelids. And using our dam standard brush just to etch in some wrinkles and flows for the flesh here, the way it might crease, adding a subdivision level. As you see, as we add those subdivision levels, we spend a lot of time building up form in the previous subdivision levels. It looks all that much better once we start subdividing and getting into higher subdivision levels. We get all these nice sort of happy accidents and realistic sorts of, folds of flesh and whatnot. Again, building up that masseter muscle at the jawline there. And we don't want to not give this ear any attention, so let's just do a little bit of attention to the ear here. I want to give a little bit more cranial mass back here using the move brush. And then I'm going to mask out the lower eyelid and then use the move brush to adjust the brows here. Really, you must master masking if you want to create good form in ZBrush. Masking is really integral. You're going to need to isolate one area from another to do things like this, to work anything in a realistic manner. So give attention to using masks and understanding masks, because there's no way to create some shapes without being able to mask what's next to them. Like right here, if I want to mask out the eye so I can work the cheekbone next to it, I have to be able to isolate the soft tissues of the eye before I start working into the bony tissues or the bony forms of the cheekbone here. I'm going to go to the Trim Dynamic brush. I like to introduce planes into the anatomy as much as possible. Even if we do smooth them back, it helps create a good sense of shape and structure. So I just want to bring some planes into the cheekbones here. And going back to my standard brush and just sort of catching highlights, sketching around the shapes here, just very loosely sort of trying to get an idea of the way the flesh is flowing, the way the wrinkles and the skin will flow. A lot of these I'm just going to smooth back later with the smooth brush so I don't feel too connected to them. It's really just me starting to sketch in sort of muscle anatomy and bony landmarks and whatnot. These striations in the pectoralis muscles here, for example. Again, we're still at a relatively low subdivision level, so we'll be adding more divisions to this later. I'm going to mask those eyes out again, step down my subdivision levels, and I just want to actually do a bit more with the brow here. Really want to sort of accentuate the bone structure there a bit more. And I think I want to give this a bit more of an aggressive kind of facial expression. Go back to our damn standard brush and just start to sketch some wrinkles around the eyes here. Adding a subdivision level now, and then just using that damn standard brush to sort of sketch some shapes and wrinkles in the lips there, creating a little shelf of the lips, just a little plane change right there, and then smoothing it back with the smooth brush. And I'm just running the inflate brush along that lower lip just to pucker it up a bit. And just building up some wrinkles now around the nostrils. Again, using that damn standard brush. It's one of my favorite brushes for sculpting preliminary wrinkles in the skin because it just has this nice, sharp in the recess but rounded at the high points quality that just really lends itself to creating wrinkles in some types of fabric and in skin. Going back to my clay tubes brush and just building up some soft tissue here on the cheeks. Now here at the eyelids, I want to give this a bit more structure. So I'm going to go to B for brush, P for pinch, and select the pinch brush. Go to the stroke menu, lazy mouse, and I'll turn on lazy mouse. Now I'm just going to use this pinch brush to pinch along the edge of the eyelid here, and then use my replay stroke to replay that, just to sharpen that eyelid edge. We'll do the same thing here on the bottom lid. I'm just going to stroke along the bottom eyelid and then replay that stroke. There we go. And I'm going to use the inflate brush inside the medial canthus to create what's called the carnacle there. Popularly kind of called the tear duct. It's that little bit of pinkish tissue right there in the corner of the eye. There we are. Let's step back up our subdivision levels. I'm going to isolate the lower jaw again, feather the edges, maybe just bring that forward a bit. Invert that mask. Let's bring those cheekbones out. Let's bring all the structure on the sides of the head out here. Going in with my damn standard brush, sort of sketching in some wrinkles here at the base of the neck. And I'm seeing some nice little happy accents here at the cheeks. I'm going to accentuate those with the damn standard brush just to sort of punch in what looks like some reasonably realistic placement for some folds and wrinkles here. And then step back up my subdivision levels and just tap it with the smooth brush a bit. Turn off my X symmetry. Use my damn standard brush. I'm just going to sketch in some forehead wrinkles here. You really want to be careful about doing forehead wrinkles with symmetry turned on because they're not symmetrical. And if they are symmetrical, it'll be a huge red flag to the viewer. They may not register it. They might not look at it and say, those forehead wrinkles are totally symmetrical. but something will feel off. And that's really important when you're creating a character or a model or anything. You want to reduce as much as possible the number of those red flags that pop up in the viewer's subconscious saying, hey, something's not right here, because they're distracting from what should be a magical and engaging moment when they're looking at this fantastic creature. So just turn off that symmetry. And let's sketch some wrinkles here. And I'm going to take the inflate brush, turn my draw size up, turn my focal shift down, and I'm just going to add a bit of inflated volume to some of these folds, or these wrinkles, I should say. These are more wrinkles in the forehead, and if you look a lot of times, forehead wrinkles like this, they do have kind of a puffy quality, but they're sort of flattened out or planed out at the top. So try and get that. Step up our subdivision levels if we can. There we go. So that's looking nice. Go back to my damn standard brush, and I'm far enough away from the center point now that I could go ahead and do a little bit more with symmetry turned on. I just want to break up these shapes here, go to the standard brush, and I want to build up the temporal ridge there. That's the edge of the skull right there. It's the temporal ridge. So I want to build that up. Go to my clay tubes brush, fill that out with the temporalis muscle. But that bit of skull anatomy right there is important. I want to keep that. Oops, go back to my clay tubes brush. There we go. I'm going to go to my standard brush, zoom into the corners of the lips here. I'm going to do these little bits that you see on the edges of like a dog's lips. Dogs tend to have these really neat sort of textures along the edges of their lips. And I want to kind of add that here. I'm going to go down to a smaller alpha. Let's do alpha 36. If I go to a smaller alpha, I can alternately turn up my draw size. And I'm just trying to create these little bumpy kind of textury bits at the corners of the lips here. And I'm going to isolate the lower lips, go to the standard brush, and I'm going to change to alpha 58. Use the Alt key, turn down my Z intensity a bit, and I just want to create some wrinkles in the lips here. Let's invert visibility, and we'll bring some more wrinkles up through the muzzle here. And let's go ahead and bring these wrinkles out from into the cheeks here. I'm going to step down my subdivision levels and just, again, sort of address some anatomy here. I feel like the head's gotten quite bulbous, which is cool. It's kind of what I was going for. But I think I need to bring the neck wider now to compensate for some of the size that we've done. There we go. So that feels better there. Compare that to that, and that feels a lot more natural. There we go. Now I've got a little idiosyncrasy there. I'm going to step down my subdivision levels and smooth that back. Then step back up, and look at that. ZBrush tries to reintroduce the detail, but it's more muted now. And that's a technique that I really like to use because it's sort of similar to when you're sculpting in clay and maybe you run rubbing alcohol over your clay and it melts the clay and smooths it back a little bit and makes it more subtle. Same thing happens here. If you just step down, smooth an area, and then step back up, ZBrush will reintroduce that detail, but it'll be much more subtle. I'm going to put in the sternoclavicular notch here, the pit of the neck, as it's popularly called. And then accentuate some of this cordage in the neck. Just want to do a bit more work on the eyes here, masking that upper lid so I can adjust the lower. And I'm going to tuck this lower lid under this crease. And then I'm going to invert the mask, take the inflate brush, and inflate that edge. And that's going to help pucker those two together and make that really feel like kind of a roll of wrinkle. Let's invert that mask, pop back up in here, and inflate this one. Really can't stress how important masks are. As you continue learning and using ZBrush, masks are going to be so important to creating good form. At the risk of just sort of sounding repetitive, it is one of those things that I really do encourage you to spend a lot of time examining, is how you can most effectively use masking. Go to our standard brush with Alpha 58. Excuse me. And I'm going to add a subdivision level now. And just do a little bit of wrinkling here. Just wanting to put some texture. Oops, that's a bit too big. Some texture here. Turn off our X symmetry because we don't want to make wrinkles at the center of the head symmetrical, because that's a dead giveaway. And then as we move away from the center line, we can turn our X symmetry back on. And bringing some of these wrinkles around the neck here. Again, turning off that symmetry. Just to add some nice tooth, breaks up the specular highlight and just creates some interesting details. I'm going to go to Alpha 57. I'm going to go to the Alpha menu and invert that Alpha and hold down the Alt key and then just make circular strokes, and that's going to create this nice sort of skin texture here. Turn the draw size down. Oops, that's too big. And just hit that with a smooth brush, gently knocking that detail back. Everything doesn't have to be perfectly spelled out. It's okay to knock things back with the smooth brush and let them be a little bit more subtle. I'm going to take the move brush here and just work into this muscle dipping down into the eye. I want to give more of a sense of a little bit of a furrowed brow here. And just applying an overall texture. And giving some coverage here on the back. Using my damn standard brush, turning down the Z intensity, just sort of suggesting some of the anatomy of the back here. We don't need to be too specific right now. again, that damp standard brush is really great for starting to suggest wrinkles and folds. And let's get some detail, just some skin texture on the ear here. We don't want that ear to be quite so smooth. Go to our standard brush with alpha 1, turn up our Z intensity, and let's get a little bit more sense of overhang there between the helix and the anti-helix of the ear. So I'll push the anti-helix in, bring the helix out and over, and just do a little bit of inflating there. There we go. Don't be afraid to step back with your move brush and kind of look at your silhouette and see where you can make some changes. I'll often turn on the flat color material just so I can look at a character here in pure silhouette and then make changes to it from this view, and then turn back on my basic material so I can see what effect those changes have had. Step down our subdivision levels and just fill in any sort of dense or weird areas we might have just created by making that change in the silhouette. I'm going to mask the back of the head here, and I'm going to accentuate that hunch of that back again. Take the inflate brush and just do some inflating here. Accentuate that jaw. And there we go. Just take a quick look at it with some shadows. Let's turn the angle up under BPR shadow. Let's go to our materials, turn our wax modifier up, go to render, render properties, turn on wax preview, and let's see what this looks like with some nice lighting. Cool. So that completes this look at sculpting on an imported mesh. I wanted us to take a look at using polygroups, how to create them and actually utilize them when we're sculpting. So we use those polygroups to get in there and work on the ears. We use them to isolate the jaw quite a bit. I also wanted to show you how you can delete portions of a mesh if you're not planning on using them. So I find it's very, very important to know how to import meshes into ZBrush and use import meshes. You're going to find that you may create something in Maya and you want to import it, or someone has supplied you a mesh that you need to work on, so you need to be able to import it, organize it, and then sculpt on it. The biggest takeaway that I want you to take from this is, if you're sculpting on a low-res model that's been imported into ZBrush, try and create as many shapes at the lowest subdivision level possible, and then step up. Hopefully you saw how if we create our forms at the lower levels and then step up, the form looks more realistic and more integrated in the surface than it does if we step up a whole bunch of subdivision levels and then try and sculpt everything on 1,000,000 polygons. So hopefully you found this video helpful, and I'll see you in the next lesson.